It's Season 3, Episode 8 of the Doctors and Litigation, the L Word podcast. I'm Gita Pensa. Welcome back. It is May 2026, and I just got back from Philadelphia, where I spoke at the Medical Professional Liability Association's conference. I was on a panel with Beth Cushing, who is Senior Vice President of Claims at CRICO. CRICO is the captive insurer of the Harvard-affiliated hospitals, which I'm also proud to say licenses my Defense Leap course, and also with Suzanne Blundy, who is president at MMC Risk Consultants. And we together discussed the importance of focusing on clinician defendants in medical litigation, helping them prepare to be powerful witnesses. And that might sound like common sense, and yet it is not currently how most cases are handled. As most physicians who've been through this process can attest, the average physician in litigation has no access to support other than perhaps this podcast, which is nuts, and has, a session or two to prepare for deposition. And what has happened in the year or two between their initial meeting with claims and the attorney and that month before deposition? For the doctor, it's really been radio silence and stewing in their own anxiety, which we see as a missed opportunity. So right now, it's the exceptional physician like Dr. Patel in episode 4 of this season that takes this education on themselves, or perhaps you as a listener of this podcast, but how can we make it a rule and not an anomaly? This was the focus of our panel. Okay, next, continuing on my theme of the importance of adequate preparation for litigation education, on June 4th, I am going to be on Roon, R-O-O-N, doing an Ask Me Anything Day, talking about litigation, performance under legal pressure, the legal basics every physician should know. I'm not giving legal advice, just so you know, but sort of a coaching conversation that most of us never got. If you haven't heard of Roon, it's a new social platform built specifically for verified physicians. So hopefully no noise, bots, trolls, misinformation. It's nice to get away from that for a while and have the collective wisdom of doctors in one place. A few weeks ago, I ran a poll on Roon asking doctors a question. If you were sued tomorrow, how confident would you feel as a member of your own defense team? And 70% said they'd either be totally lost or lukewarm at best, which honestly, that was not a surprise. So if you are a physician, I've got a link for sign up to Roon in the show notes. It's R-O-O-N again. And see if you can join me on June 4th. It's free to make an account, quick verification process, like 30 seconds. And hopefully I will see you in there on June 4th. Okay. Finally, let us move into our topic for today. I'm putting my coaching hat back on, and today we are talking about something that I think is problematic for many of the physician defendants I have worked with, and that is perfectionism. As you know, we talk a lot on this podcast about the emotional and psychological weight of being sued, shame, isolation, fear. But underneath a lot of that, if you start pulling on the threads, you often find perfectionism. And we all use the word, I'm really a perfectionist, as though it's a positive thing. But perfectionism has its drawbacks. And one of them is that perfectionists are usually not very good at handling shame. They have very little shame resilience. And this is something that I come back to again and again in my coaching work and in the LEAP course because I think it is one of the most underappreciated drivers of suffering in litigation. So here's what I mean. Most of us came into medicine as perfectionists already. I mean, who else would get all those high grades and achievements? And those are often achieved by putting pressure on ourselves at the cost of training ourselves to be afraid of failure and afraid of the judgment of others. And we thrive on praise and we shrink from criticism. And we start to base our worth externally on our achievements rather than simply who we are as human beings. And then we often start to have an inner monologue that is much more critical than supportive because we believe that is the way to make ourselves better. And to some extent, it worked for a while. Medicine trains us then through a combination of shame and perfectionism. This is how we're conditioned to become quote unquote good doctors. Shame is the way a society keeps its people in line, and medicine is expert at it. And so starting with these tender perfectionists, it shapes us into good doctors who know what the paragon of good doctor is. To never miss, to always make the right diagnosis, to never make a mistake, to always have a perfect outcome. And then, of course, that's impossible. Even though we want to believe it won't happen, something bad happens. There is an adverse event, or you do make a well-meaning mistake, or you do pick the wrong diagnosis, and then potentially the lawsuit arrives. The entire architecture of a malpractice case is built on messaging that you fell short. You are bad. You are negligent. You should be ashamed. It lands directly on the part of us that was already primed to believe that imperfection is unacceptable, and we have a tendency to internalize it. And then we isolate and we turn the shame inwards, and the negative self-talk becomes relentless. And even for the physician who's not questioning their own care, who knows clearly, honestly, that they did nothing wrong, litigation can be consuming for them too, because now it's about the unfairness and the humiliation of a public accusation, about who might find out, what they might think. And that anger and resentment are completely understandable, and they are also corrosive. And they will color how we show up at work and how we see our patients and whether we stay in medicine at all. And we create our own worsening shame. So instead of our minds being a place where we could take refuge or seek solace, they become a ruminative torture chamber. And a human in that torture chamber will not be ready to perform well as a witness in the process. That torture chamber has to be the first stop in preparation. The antidote to shame is not more self-criticism, which is largely fear-based. We have to learn how to separate our identity from the accusation. And that is almost impossible to do without first understanding the perfectionism that fused them together in the first place. And we could all use a little instruction on the difference between pursuing perfection versus pursuing excellence, being motivated by growth rather than the fear of self-punishment, and how to become more shame resilient. And all of this together is exactly why I wanted to have a conversation about perfectionism with today's guest. Dr. Amna Shabbir is a fractional chief well-being officer, dual board-certified physician, TEDx speaker, globally top-ranked podcast host. I know, she sounds perfect, but we're going to talk about perfectionism. Working at the intersection of clinical medicine, evidence-based coaching, and organizational well-being. She's trained at Duke University and the Cleveland Clinic. She is a master certified professional coach, a national board certified health and wellness coach, a Duke certified integrative wellness coach, and HeartMath certified in building personal resilience. And her TEDx talk, Perfectionism Has a Solution, It's Not What You Think, has resonated with high achievers across fields. So I'm really excited to bring you our conversation about perfectionism in medicine and litigation. Dr. Amna Shabbir, it's so nice to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Pence. I am so excited to be here.
So, of course, you can call me Gita. I'm going to call you Amna. You know, our listeners, if they have not yet been introduced to you, I'm going to really encourage them to check out your work and check out your TEDx talk and all the work that you've done around perfectionism in medicine. I really wanted to have you come and talk to our audience because one of the things I work on with my clients so often, and one of the things that makes litigation so difficult for us to contend with, is shame. Is this feeling of shame. We don't talk about it. It's a taboo thing to talk about. And so having open conversations, open dialogue around it, it's just not something that happens. And shame is the thing that's really standing in our way. And I've been thinking a lot about how doctors have the tendency to be perfectionists, and we'll get into what that word really means in a second. And that, in my opinion, the perfectionism, the flip side of it is that we don't handle shame very well. And so our own perfectionism is standing in our way of coping with litigation and learning how to perform well in it. And so when I got acquainted with your work and all the really insightful, to the heart things that you have to say about the ways in which our perfectionism helps and harms us, I wanted to have you come and talk about all of this through your lens. Tell us a little bit about how you started thinking about perfectionism and then becoming someone who's become now really an expert at the intersection of perfectionism and medicine.
Thank you for sharing that, Gita. We all have our moments, right, in life where things happen. And as I reflect on my life's journey, I feel everything was tied together inextricably with perfectionism. When your child does something, it makes you fundamentally halt and question your life decisions. And so there was this moment, and I talk about this in my TEDx talk, When my daughter came home from school, and she's in elementary school, she's young, and she hands me her test, and the score is 99 out of 100. It's a maths test. And she looks at me and she said, Mommy, don't even look at that. I'm going through all the papers. She's like, don't even look at that, Mommy. I know I was stupid. And I just paused. I truly felt shattered in that moment. And I felt I was being all this supportive, healing mother. I'm getting myself in a space of healing so I don't pass these toxic achievement narratives to my child. But when she said that to me, I truly had to have a moment of self reflection like, what is going on? Why
Yeah.
is my daughter taking this message? That's really where it started. And I became enamored with this topic. I don't want to use the word obsessed because then it just feeds we're talking about perfectionism, but it just made me realize that we have it wrong. The way we view it perfectionism these days, or modern perfectionism, we have it wrong. We talk about perfectionism in very constricted individual terms. Your perfectionism is a problem. Please go and release your attachments. Meditate. Do what you need to do. Okay, fine. I'll go and I'll meditate and I'll get coached and I'll do all the things that I need to do, but I will come back into this system that does not allow a single moment for my humanity. So, modern perfectionism is not just an individual's problem. There are many different types of perfectionism, and we'll click on that later in the conversation. But perfectionism, it needs to be understood not just in constricted, narrow individual terms, but in larger contextual terms. And that is what my work and all the interviews and all the research that I did behind it has led up to that moment. And perfectionism in medicine, wow, like that's a whole different conversation, right? And I want to set the stage from the start. If anyone is feeling uncomfortable when I start telling you that perfectionism is not a great idea in medicine, I want to acknowledge that feeling and
Mhm.
promise as you listen to this conversation, your standards will not drop. We hope to provide some relief and support today. So that's one thing. And the way you're viewing perfectionism is, frankly, the word ignorance comes to my mind because that's what's happened to all of us. We have glorified it. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. You're going to be talking about releasing perfectionism, and perfectionism is not great. And in all these different contexts, wherever you pick and start the conversation from, but do you really want me to let go of my perfectionism? Do you? And that's that inner conversation that is so critical to have because you mentioned shame. And the way I look at it, shame is the currency of perfectionism.
Aha. That's great. I like that. Shame is the currency of perfectionism. And the other thing that shame is used for is it's really the way by which societies, whatever the culture is, it's a way by which culture keep the people aware of what the norms are and keep people adhering to the norms, right? If you step outside the norms, then you're sort of programmed to feel shame. And medicine is very explicit about what the norms are. And what medicine wants us to really believe the norms are is to have a perfect outcome every time and to practice perfect medicine every time. And so when we fall outside those norms, we feel shame, even though those are impossible demands. Like, we're all humans practicing an art, an imperfect science. There will never be perfect outcomes every time. And yet, that is what we're sort of conditioned to believe the standard should be. That should be the norm. How do we do that?
It's not something that we're conditioned to believe. It's just a fact that we've taken to accept at this point. And I
Mm.
really like to call it for what it is because I was hemming and hawing and dancing around this concept. But let's just be honest for a second. Like you mentioned, we want our physicians and all clinicians and our healthcare team to come up with a perfect outcome every single time. Understandably so, right? Because their lives at stake. And of course, I'm a mother, I'm a human myself. I seek healthcare. I want there to be the best outcome, the perfect outcome every single time. But when we expect perfection at all costs from human beings, that is not going to happen, like you said. And in that moment, when we do that, we dehumanize our doctors, we dehumanize our clinicians and healthcare teams, all the humans involved. And when we dehumanize the very humans that are taking care of people that are sick and suffering, as a consequence, we dehumanize our patients.
Can you
And
spell
so
out what you mean? Why does that dehumanize us? Why does expecting perfection dehumanize someone?
So there is expecting perfection and there is perfectionism. And perfectionism is that you have to have that perfect outcome every single time. But a human being is prone to make errors. Like it is built into till AI is plugged into our brains directly till we achieve some robotic status. I mean, AI makes mistakes as well. We're setting ourselves up for failure. And in that moment, when we are expecting you to perform at this flawless level, you are no longer human. We have stripped you away from your basic physiologic needs, right? You are not allowed to sleep, eat, rest, have a family, have a life outside of medicine, and still all the other things, as well as have a perfect outcome every single time. I mean, just let that land for a second. And it's not just, we talked about in medicine, the culture of medicine. The culture of medicine exists among the culture that we live in on this planet. Society as a large has decided that physicians will always have to have the perfect outcome every single time. Then the culture of medicine has absorbed that narrative. We have glorified it, and then we have completely celebrated it, leaving no room for our humanity for each other as well. So
Mhm.
it's layer on layer on layer. And that's why context is so important because we can talk about all of these elements of health and well being, but till we understand the larger context in which this perfectionism is existing, nothing's going to change.
So we ourselves demand perfection. Society demands perfection and perfect outcomes. And then the legal system, unfortunately, also finds a way to make anything short of perfection something that is punishable. They make you culpable for it, or at least to feel that way. I know I've said before that the civil litigation system, it's dispute resolution. It's not supposed to feel punitive, but it certainly does. Or if someone's certainly tacking on punitive damages or something like that. And so the legal system making these demands, right? And the fear that we have of it and of the shame of the process and everything like that. This is something that most of us are not prepared for at all. We're certainly not prepared for the adverse outcome or how we're going to feel and how terrible we're going to be to ourselves when that happens or when we make a mistake. And then when this becomes a very public blaming and you're going to have to answer for it and face this possibility that other doctors or other people or people in your community are going to think less of you. I mean, this is what we say, right? We say that they're going to think less of us. They say that they're going to judge us. What do we do with that? How do we deal with that in our perfectionistic minds? There's probably one way I think that you would probably advocate that we would start to think about this.
I love that question. And to fully answer that question, I invite everybody to step back, especially the ones that are feeling very uncomfortable right now, as I'm inviting everyone to release perfectionism. I think the term ignorance that I used earlier, here's what I want to offer here. I think we confuse perfectionism for excellencism. We confuse perfection for excellence. So, what every one of us, absolutely all doctors, everyone in the healthcare team and system need to focus on, and they should always strive for, is excellence. I want to be the best person possible, but not for perfectionism. That's the correct term that I would recommend. And understanding that the oath that we took was do no harm. It wasn't try your best to do no harm. And do no harm, again, is also in a way removing humanity because somewhere we interpreted do no harm as like do not be human. So, first understanding the concept of the difference between what is perfectionism and what is excellencism. The second point to understand are the types of perfectionism, right? There are three types of perfectionism. Most commonly, all of us have heard of adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism, but I feel like just talking in those terms removes that context where society plays a lot of part and role and culture comes in. That includes the legal culture, that includes the medical culture, all culture.
This is a good place, I think. We were going to click on it later where we talk about the different spheres of perfectionism. And I know you get into this in your TEDx talk as well. Can you walk us through those?
Yes. So the first is self oriented perfectionism. I must be perfect. And that
Okay.
is where you see in medicine. Everyone, most of us, shouldn't use absolute terms like everyone, but most of us clinicians are self-oriented perfectionists, high achievers. I have to be perfect every single time. And then we have other-oriented perfectionism, which is I expect others around me to be perfect. We model that over and over again
Mm.
by the way we treat our trainees, by the way we show up, and so many other ways, not just trainees, like even other humans in our lives, our children, our parents, whoever. And then the third type is socially prescribed perfectionism, where we think that the whole world demands perfection from us, whether it
Mm.
is that's even strangers online, it's any and everyone, where the entire world, the society, the culture, our organizations, the culture of medicine, all of that would come in. Now, as we talk about perfectionism, this is not a soft topic. This is not something that's like a nice to have conversation. It is important to have this conversation because when we look at what is perfectionism doing to us at large, all types of perfectionism are harmful, but especially the type that's rising the fastest, that's socially prescribed perfectionism, which is rising the fastest in young adults. That's the type that's strongly linked with maladaptive psychological distress, things like anxiety, depression, all these other elements. And so when we look at health and well being, it is a critical topic to talk about. Now, coming back to that earlier question that you had asked, where does all of this come up and like what can we do about it? So first and foremost, we have to develop understanding and awareness and stop glorifying it. And this is why this conversation is so important. Yes, there are
Mm.
real tangible things that we can do, but till we actually talk about something or we think it's a problem, when most of us don't even think that this is a problem. We show up for interviews and we say, "Oh, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist," when they talk about, "Oh, what flaws do you have?" And we glorify that, right? But knowing that deeply that our words matter and that is really impacting and fracturing our relationship with our patients at large. When we go around with this do not be human narrative, which is what perfectionism in medicine is, we are not being open and transparent and honest with our patients because they don't see that we have been tasked to produce perfect outcomes in an extremely broken healthcare system. When we pretend we have it all together to our colleagues, we also magnify our suffering. There's so much to unpack there, but the most important thing is that we have to lead with honesty. And this is what it is. Acknowledging that perfectionism is a problem is the first step towards healing and being honest.
I really value what you just said. One thing we probably should unpack before I go there is that perfectionists tend to have a very harsh inner narrative. They tend to be highly, highly self critical. So that when they don't hit the mark or they don't behave perfectly, there is a lot that happens in their own minds that is something to honestly be afraid of. Like they make themselves feel ashamed and terrible and whatever other pejorative words you want to put in there. But their own mind is telling them those things. And also feeling like everybody else in the world is thinking these things about me. But a lot of it is just the perfectionist tells themselves, like, you idiot, you stupid, how could you? That kind of language. And when we hit litigation, right? If something bad has happened and all of these other people are telling you in these legal sort of terms that you are a bad doctor, you are bad at this. What can we do to turn that inner critic into something more compassionate that would be able to help us through this hard time as opposed to being something that just sort of piles on to all of this external criticism?
Self criticism and self compassion are the core of any well being strategy that is ever examined. And when we talk about litigation and how a physician feels, litigation is like an identity earthquake, right? It is an attack at your being. Imagine the worst thing possible that you thought could become possible, and that actually happened. The fear that you had, the imposter that you felt was roaring inside you and they finally came for you. So, absolutely, that is all happening. And so, validating and acknowledging is a critical first step. And then the second step is, as somebody who was very hesitant to practice self compassion ever in her life, I had to really look at do the numbers and does the evidence suggest that I should be easy on myself? Like, is it okay in ever to show practice self compassion? And so we know that perfectionists are low on self compassion and high in self criticism in a moment that is so horrible. It's just so horrible. There are no words to express this experience for anyone. All parties involved are suffering. We know that humans that are self compassionate actually take more responsibility for their actions
Mhm.
instead of putting this off to the other person. Self compassion is critical to be your own ally in moments of harshness. And so, objectively, if you ask me, what does data suggest for anybody listening? Should you practice self compassion? Absolutely. Whether you're going through this horrible incident or not, whether you're living in fear of litigation, wherever you're at, or if you're not even a clinician and you're listening in today, self compassion across the board is critical. In this extremely difficult scenario, a way that can be super helpful is to just step away from our body and look at the experience and witness it through a third person's perspective. That can be really insightful. And ask yourself this question: in this extremely challenging moment, would you ever talk to a peer, a colleague, the way you're talking to yourself? In this extremely hard, horrible moment, the way you're talking to yourself, would you talk to any random stranger, a physician you didn't know anything about, the way you're talking to yourself right now? Because we know that you are a component of a large healthcare system. You are not the only person. You went into this with good intentions. So, knowing that about yourself is important, but stepping away and looking at things from a third person's perspective and then asking yourself of this question: would I talk to a loved one, a peer, a colleague, the way I just talked to myself?
So helpful. Thank you so much. I would like you for a second to talk to the physician who has not yet been sued, but is terrified of it. A lot of people reach out to me now that haven't been sued, but maybe listened to the podcast or kind of gotten a sense that like this thing is looming out there and they are absolutely terrified. Learning about it doesn't seem quite enough to quell the fear. They're paralyzed by their charting. They're just so afraid. How does perfectionism play into that fear? And what would you say to that person?
Well, you're talking to that person right now.
Uh,
And I will say that, especially when I started after residency, the fear was debilitating. The
okay.
amount of rumination, the amount of cross checking my chart, the amount of over documentation, the amount of like analysis paralysis, second guessing, all of those things are absolutely real. And then you stop and you wonder, is this worth it? Is this whole thing that I dedicated my entire life to, the moment that I'm here, is this worth it? Validating that fear is important because we're cerebral humans. And when I'm coaching my clients, we have to face things, right? So, first of all, validating, creating space for that fear to almost sit as this individual entity on itself. So, I invite everybody to first notice, validate, and almost think of it: okay, here's this fear that I have. And I'm just going to put this to this side with me. I'm not suppressing it. I'm not denying it. It's very much there because a lot of times we just want, okay, what's the fix? What's the fix? What's the next thing? You can't do that. So acknowledging and just putting it right next to you, almost like a purse or a bag or a box. And then just, okay, this is my fear of litigation, that it's here. Now, what are the things that I am doing that I need to do? And what are the things that I am doing that I don't need to do? Almost like very factually observing yourself. It's like facts are neutral. So, first question is, are you giving the best care possible to your patients? Are you giving excellent care to your patients? Are you doing your level best? And you know how you know that you're doing your level best is, when is enough, right?
Yeah.
Ask yourself that question. And this enoughness is the problem, right? So when you ask yourself this question, are you doing the best for your patients, or are you doing the best if there was a problem ever to cover yourself up? Where is the intent? Is the intent to hide, or is the intent to be the best physician possible? So
Mhm.
that's the first thing. Just like pause and take a deep breath and just notice. Make a list of all the things that are distressing you over and over again, like almost like these obsessions that you develop, going back and at night, opening up the chart and making sure that what was the creatinine? What were the lab results? Did you address everything? So just make a list, and very practical list of all the things that you're doing, and ask yourself, where are these actions that I'm taking going to benefit my patients, versus where are these actions going to tire me out? Because eventually you're going to get tired out. You're
Mhm.
going to also get tired, beating yourself up and berating yourself, it gets exhausting after a while.
Sure
You
does.
can yell at yourself from one finish line to another finish line, maybe, but at the end of the day, the practice of medicine is a marathon. So the fear, you have to look at it almost like, okay, I acknowledge it, it's here. Let me make a list of things that I am doing right now, and then noticing what is the intention. And then lastly, asking yourself, what is your circle of control versus what is your circle of influence? What are the things that are in your control that you can do every single day realistically? And then what are the things that are outside of your control? Own both of those things. And that is where not only will this fear of litigation be, you can't live your life from a space of fear, just so you're actually looking at it, you're looking it straight. Okay, here's my box of fear. I came to the clinic or the OR and I put it right next to me, and I'm still going to show up for my patients regardless. It's there. But then also, what are the things that I can truly, truly lean into and control and do? And when we do that, we radically are able to create awareness around moral injury versus burnout. So when I take responsibility for all the things that are outside of my control, when I just let go of that responsibility because they're outside of my area of control, doesn't mean I'm not going to advocate for my patients or for myself, but that allows for this mindfulness component to sink in, which is a core part of self-compassion, is mindfulness, looking at things as they are and showing up regardless.
And this is where I know you talk about performance based identity versus value based identity. This is where I think really paying attention to like what your values are as opposed to what your performance is. I find that very helpful to me. Like if you're really leaning into like, am I the person that this patient needs right now? Am I documenting the things that are important? Do I document like I care about this person? Have I demonstrated adequate care for this person, right? These are things that get to our values as a physician and the importance of the work that we're actually doing on a human to human level and letting that be the thing that guides us as opposed to documenting from a place of fear, testing from a place of fear, just sort of being very, very afraid of making a mistake. And essentially, if it were a game, playing to not lose as opposed to playing to win, right? Like what we're talking about is the real value in it is what value am I bringing to my patients? And then being able to let the documentation reflect that and really extracting the meaning that you came for. Like, what did you come to this for, right? You didn't come to it really so that everybody, well, maybe some of us did, but like, yeah, that was sort of a pride too, that people would think good things about us. But you could have done a lot of things that people would have thought good things about you. But you came to this, and you came to this because you want to have a positive impact on your patients and use your skill set and take good care of them. And I find that leaning into that values way of thinking as opposed to the perfectionistic check all the boxes, make sure the appearance is as good as possible. I don't know. Is that a way to start?
I love the way you framed that. And thank you for bringing that concept up, because performance based identity is equal to saying, I am my outcomes and my worth is tied to my performance, whether that is revenue, whether it is some sort of like metric or a number. Versus when you are really looking at your values based identity, one of the core things that shows up over and over again is your integrity. What is integrity? It is doing the right thing when no one is watching. And that is really truly leaning into your values. And when you lean into those values based way of living, your value based identity, you can derive joy every single day from what you are doing, your journey to excellence. But when you're living from a performance based identity, it is always about impression management. Am I looking the right way? Is it showing up? And to the outside world, is it looking the right way? Which is a very fear based way of living. And also, that is a way that you cannot access help. Because what does perfectionism say? Perfectionism says from the get go, the first day, you need to have all the answers. The first day you step into clinic, you have to have all the answers. When we display other oriented perfectionism and we have like new medical students or new trainees on a rotation, that's what it does. Like, I need you to not fall and make a mess. And I love the work that Dr. Will Bynum has done regarding shame in medicine. And,
Mhm.
he talks about that there is this process of like being bad at something and then eventually getting good at it. But when perfectionism doesn't leave space for that growth journey, and that's what performance based identity is like, I need to have the answers all the time, every single time. Like, what a bad way to lead and engage in teams when you're leading from that space or engaging from that space.
Boy, there are a lot of leaders in medicine that need to understand that concept. I want to get back to this excellencism. I'm a huge fan of this concept and the difference between, I think everyone needs to be clear on the difference. Yes, pursuing excellence is what we all want. We all want excellent performance every single day. And it's different from perfection, which is unattainable. And in the pursuit of the unattainable, you will drive yourself mad, frankly. But in the pursuit of excellence, you're probably going to become excellent. So I want to talk about how excellencism, this concept, can be a lifeline to us. And I want to back up actually even and say that in litigation, we're not even talking excellencism. We're talking reasonableness. And a lot of people cannot bridge that gap. Like we talk about this expectation gap. A lot of people can't deal with the fact that in litigation, we're looking at, or what it should be about, is about the reasonableness of your actions. Was it reasonable? I've worked with many, many, many clients where a diagnosis was elusive and rare, and they did very reasonable work and did not come up with the elusive and rare diagnosis. My own case is a case like that. It was a very atypical presentation of something that, like, I don't know how I would have predicted it. And yet, when it became illuminated that that was the diagnosis, the idea in my head was that I had failed and that I had made a mistake and that to some extent I deserve whatever I got. How do we help ourselves in this situation where we want to do the very best for people, and yet in this period where we need to be our own supporters, how do we get okay with this idea of I'm here to pursue excellence, but I can't hit it every time? I'm allowed to learn and to pursue it, and I'm allowed to fail on the way, and I'm also allowed to defend what was reasonable care.
That's a great question, or rather, I should say that's an excellent question. This conversation is part of that solution. Part of that journey is to actually not take on the entire responsibility for the solution and open conversations on larger scale. And I'm so grateful to you for having these conversations, not shying away from the tough stuff and talking about this on your podcast, on your speaking engagements that you do, the amazing work that you do. When you talk, you model to other people in the audience that this really horrible thing happened and it's going to be okay. And we're going to learn and grow from it however we can, whatever was intended. I really want to say that because when I take complete responsibility for my perfectionism, I'm not going to take that responsibility anymore. I live in this culture that programmed me this way. Even my upbringing, my background as a South Asian woman has a lot to play with it. There's so many layers to this. Yes, acknowledging that is critical. I'm not saying that means, oh, I can't do anything about it. But if you don't even acknowledge it, you're going to continue to feel horrible and you're going to continue to be quiet about the subject. So conversations are critical. Now, when we talk about excellencism and perfectionism, this is a very important conversation to have. But I want to lead this by describing the way I look at perfectionism, which is that it is operating primarily from a deficit mindset. It's that you are trying to find everything that's wrong in you. As a perfectionist, you know everything that you think is wrong in you, your perceived intolerance to all imperfection, whether it's your physical being, it's your performance, every single thing. I can name all the things if you want me to name them. And I've gone through a whole host of things, right? Whether it's my hair, my face, my skin, how I showed up in that visit. Already, things that I should have said earlier in this podcast, and probably I didn't. Things I will reevaluate later on. All of these things that are happening actively. And I like to openly acknowledge them because we think that there's some invisible proverbial line and you cross over it and then you're all healed and good and recovered. It's a process. And so the first thing is to kind of like recognize all of this is happening. This is not just my problem. And when I am leading from a deficit mindset, I am aware of all the things I think are wrong about me. And as a perfectionist, all I want to do is hide my deficiencies, hide those things that I think are wrong with me from the rest of the world, which is impression management, that I don't want you to know. I feel like a fraud. That's where imposterism comes in.
Impression management. I like that. Okay.
And so when you're talking about perfectionism, you're hiding. You're hiding all your flaws all the time and you're living in fear. So you're not really actually taking care of your patient, actually you're more self-serving because I don't want to have this horrible thing and I don't want other people to find out that horrible thing happened. But when you're leaning from a space of excellence, it's intrinsically motivated. Healthy striving is more intrinsically motivated. I want to show up as the best version of myself. And that would mean I will ask other people for help. I will take responsibility. Things will get messy. I don't care about my impression, how I appear to the outside world. And that is really rooted in your values. It's growth oriented. You're going to go seek feedback. You're going to work with teams. That is being human also. So excellencism allows clinicians to maintain their high standards. High standards are not the problem without demanding superhuman flawlessness. You can have high standards. Again, I want that to be very clear. The problem is what happens when you don't meet those high standards? The way you treat yourself, that's going to determine if you're an excellentist or a perfectionist. When a bad thing happens or things don't go as you planned, are you going to be self compassionate? Are you going to look at things from mindfulness, the perspective, the three components that Dr. Neff talks about: mindfulness, shared human experience, as well as self kindness?
This is the work of Dr. Kristen Neff. I will link to her site in the show notes. If you want to understand self-compassion, that is the place to start. Her work is just instrumental, but please go on.
Her book is one of the most amazing things. I feel like everyone in medicine should read the book Self Compassion. So, when we are going to approach something from that lens, it's very different versus when things go wrong. Are you going to dress yourself down and not be your own ally? And that's going to determine the difference. So, I feel as a patient, I want my doctors to be excellencists, not perfectionists. And here I also want to take a pause and add another personal frustration of mine. Not so long ago, before we pressed record, I was sharing with you, it is so easy to get frustrated at the front facing individuals in our healthcare system. And
Yeah.
who is more front facing than the doctor that's listed on your chart, or the other clinicians, the advanced practice providers, even that are listed on your chart? I tried to get my father in law's insulin refilled. Insulin, a very basic medicine, diabetes, a very basic disease at this point that we know of. He's been on this insulin since 1995. It took me 3 weeks as a physician to get that refill done. I was so frustrated. This is just
It took
one
you
month.
how long?
3 weeks, basic Lantus refill. Now, at that point, there was a lot of frustration. And when you unpack all the Swiss cheese, this situation out, it was just one medical assistant. It was new because, again, retention, turnover, the whole thing, working in an impossible system, was clicking the wrong button. And I'm going between the doctor, the hospital, the pharmacy, the nurse on call, the whole thing. And it took 3 weeks for this to come. And in that point, I felt so frustrated. So our patients deserve the best care possible. And our clinicians are working in impossible systems. So had I not known what
Yeah.
happened to a primary care doctor behind the scenes, I would have had less compassion. So it's really important to add the conversation of compassion when we talk about excellencism and perfectionism.
I love all of that. I would like to talk about, in your TEDx talk, you talk about the courage bridge. I want to think about the courage bridge and how we can apply it to ourselves as human beings in litigation after a harm event. Could you talk about the courage bridge and how we might be able to use that?
The courage bridge was a very amazing experience that I had, creating it with amazing collaborators and researchers that I interviewed during the process of creating the TEDx talk. And thank you for being one of them, Dr. Pensa. So there are three components, and I want to start by saying that the courage bridge is always going to be under construction. So again, imagine that proverbial line that I talked about. It's not like, okay, tomorrow my bridge is done and we're over. I don't like these weird, rigid ways in which we look at healing. Healing is a process, it's an iterative process. So there are three components to that. The first is examining your intentions, the intention behind your action, the courage to examine that. There is no more courageous moment than in one's life than when you're going through something as horrible as litigation, as scarring, as challenging. Really, the first thing is, yes, you're going to require a tremendous amount of bravery to get to the other side. So the first component is examining your intention. What is that intent? And this is where the conversation of the values comes in. What is the truth of who you are? What was your intent when the event that you're being put on the stand for came upon? Like, what was your intent? Step away. What was the intent behind your action? This is how I think it applies. Your intent was to serve, your intent was not to harm. And as you examine that entire series of events that potentially happen, at every step, your documentation, the people you asked for help, what was your intent? And the intent always is that you were trying to do your best. And so examining our intent in that context is really important because litigation will always push you to do impression management, image management. So whether you're living in the fear of litigation or actually going through litigation, notice your intent. The
Okay.
second step is to fail with self compassion. And we kind of touched on it already. But anytime you are suffering or you're failing or you're falling, ask yourself, how would you treat a loved one in this situation? Or even, like I said, a random stranger, would you treat them or talk to them the way you talk to yourself? Because compassion doesn't really erase the seriousness of a situation. It actually helps you to be more mindful and helps you to deal with it better. And the third part is what we're doing right now, which is modeling your humanity, having the courage to do that. Now, modeling your humanity does not mean you have to ignore legal advice and overshare details or whatever your attorney is telling you in this situation.
Hmm.
Modeling your humanity means being honest. And the way I view modeling your humanity specifically in this scenario is three levels. So there is your individual level, there is the culture of medicine, and then there is society at large. So, to your own self, are you allowing space for that humanity for yourself in your conversations with yourself? How are you talking to yourself? Just noticing that. We know that this healthcare system is deeply flawed and it's structured to monetize suffering rather than support healing. We know that it's broken, it doesn't work. I can definitely say this more as a patient than as a doctor. So, noticing, am I being human in an impossible system for yourself? And then on a broader, then we move to the medical culture, right? What does modeling our humanity look like? Statistics show 1 in 3 physicians will get sued. It almost no one talks about it. Where is their humanity? Where are the safe pockets of support where peers, trainees, attendees can have these conversations about errors without fear, grief? Instead, we're talking about learning instead of just shame and silencing. So I think the culture of medicine really needs to catch up. And again, I really want to thank you for being an important voice in that conversation of modeling your humanity.
Mm.
And then lastly, on the broader societal level, the expectation of flawlessness, the cultural myth, holding physicians to superhuman standards that, as a consequence, like we mentioned, dehumanizing everyone. It's critical. So, modeling our humanity is a very core component when we talk about socially prescribed perfectionism. My hope is that these conversations can open spaces for healing and for our humanity.
You write, perfectionism is isolating, humanity is magnetic. If we were allowed that in medical culture, what do you think would change?
I think a lot of actual and honest conversations can follow from a space of humanity, transparency, and courage. Look at it this way: when somebody's pretending to know it all and be it all, I give this example of influencers online, they just look so put together. Do we really connect with them? We connect with the real people that talk about the real things. And so when I look at this in the context of the malpractice system and medicine at large, I think that this is what will actually restore dignity for our patients as well as our clinicians. And when we're not shying away for these humane solutions, and this is where honest conversations can follow. But if you're expecting somebody to have perfect outcomes every single time, you're really not going to address the root cause and you're not really going to address what is happening underlying. Those are stifling messages that really translate into us not asking for help. And actually, I think that this is way more harmful. Actually, more harm can happen in the systems when there is this expectation that let's cover up so everything looks perfect to the outside world. Let's be honest and let's share our fallibilities.
I think medicine is having a crisis of performance based perfectionism as opposed to thinking with their values. Let's close with this. Thank you so much. I think this is going to give people a lot to talk about, a lot to think about, I hope. And you've articulated so much of this so beautifully. If you could say one thing to a physician who's listening, who is sitting alone with this lawsuit hanging over their heads, believing that they're broken or they're unworthy, what would you want them to hear?
I would say you are not your worst moment. You are not broken because this happened. You are a human being practicing inside an impossible system. And the depth of your pain is not a sign of inadequacy, but of integrity. You deserve compassion, support, and a meaningful future on the other side of this, just like any other human being.
Thank you so much for coming to talk with us. It's like a balm. I really appreciate it. I hope that people listening find some comfort in it and know that the way we have historically talked to ourselves is not the way that we need to remain. And the way that we've historically thought about things is not the way we need to continue to think. Thank you for coming along and helping us consider a software update.
This has been such an honor. Thank you, Dr. Penta.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. And thanks again to Dr. Amna Shabbir for sharing her expertise and time. Check out the links to Dr. Shabbir's materials and other resources mentioned in the show notes. I'll be back next month, and I hope to see you all then.